Good evening and welcome to For the Record. Suva is going to be a hive of activity as of tomorrow with the beginning of the Pacific Island Development Forum Third Leaders Summit, which gets underway at the Grand Pacific Hotel. With us in studio tonight for discussions are the Interim Secretary General of the PIDF, Mr. Amina Yavoli, and Dr. Mahendra, the Advisor on Climate Change for the PIDF. The significance of this particular summit is manifold, one being the adoption of the PIDF Charter, and the other, the theme for this year's summit, which is Building Climate Resilient Green Blue Pacific Economies. We'll begin with our discussions. Amina, I've briefly given an intro of what is going to happen over this week, but two very significant events. One, the adoption of the PIDF Charter, the first ever charter for the forum, and discussions on climate change. Talk a bit about the significance of having this charter. What does it mean for the forum going into the future?
Thank you, Edwin. Let me start by saying that it's important for the organization to establish a foundational agreement which will provide its international legal persona. And that is what this charter will provide. In layman terms, what it means, it can relate, undertake its work internationally with its development partners, as well as with the United Nations agencies. So it's a key document of the organization.
So over the last few years, while the PIDF has existed without a charter, what has the forum's recognition been in the international arena?
The organization,
quasi-legal, quasi-recognized.
Yeah. The organization was operating under an international an interim institutional arrangement, of which the recognition provided by the government of Fiji, providing the host country responsibilities, as well as giving due recognition in terms of a legal gazette that recognizes PIDF as a legal institution in Fiji. What the challenge that we face is trying to extend beyond the boundaries of Fiji, and that's what the charter will do.
That's an explanation of the overall, the essence of the charter, but within the charter itself are various policies and strategies and ambitions and visions for the PIDF and its members. What are some of the key focus areas in the charter?
An important focus in the charter is in terms of, one, the governance arrangements. As a result of our 5 months consultations around the region, the participants from member countries, Pacific institutions, including private sector organizations and NGOs, have come up with a governance structure that befits the vision and the mission of PIDF. And that is one of the key elements which, as you know, the organization is a platform bringing together all stakeholders of societies, the public sector, private sector, as well as the NGOs and civil societies. So this is a challenge which PIDF has managed to bring together through that consultative process. So the governance structure begins with the conference, which will be taking place every 2 yearly. Then we have the Leaders Summit, which is an annual event similar to the current practice. And then also we have a Members Representative Council. This is similar to a senior officials committee of any regional organizations, but the difference here is that the members are drawn from all stakeholders of society from the national level. Then below that is the National Sustainable Development Boards, which will be created at the national level to enable them, to carry forward the PIDF missions, as well as some other commitments, as you know, with the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals.
You mentioned one of the key differences that the PIDF has is the inclusion of non-government entities, civil society, and even parts of the international community, even the private sector. this has actually been the defining difference, if we can say, of the PIDF. What would their inclusion be once the charter is adopted?
Once the charter is adopted, it recognizes them, legally and officially as members. At the moment, they are foundational members because since the inception of PIDF 2 years ago, they've been participating, contributing, to the PIDF summits. And the charter will define those who have been engaging since the last 2 summits, and also the new ones who would like to join once the charter is signed. So there's a category of memberships in there which does not really discriminate, but provides an interface that will enable them, to become full members of PIDF.
There would be some requirements as well for any entity that wishes to become a member after the charter is adopted.
Under the current charter, the draft charter, that is for the conference to decide who are going to be the new members. But the foundational members which the charter recognizes now, the drafting right now recognizes, is that they will continue on their memberships. So it's like an automatic accession process into the PIDF.
As the meetings get underway over the next few days in Suva, when all these leaders get together, there are a series of meetings on the wayside, working groups and whatnot. Is there a particular group that's going to be looking at the charter, or is it going to go straight to the Leaders Summit?
The charter will go directly to the leaders because we've exhausted the mandate. Last year in Nandi, the leaders mandated the Secretariat to undertake this development of the charter in order to provide a long-term institutional arrangement for PIDF. That's ready now in its draft form, awaiting the leaders' decision. The meeting proper will focus on the theme of this year, which is climate resilience, specific blue economies.
Okay, and on that note, we will take a quick break. When we come back, we'll begin discussions on the actual theme of the PIDF Leaders Summit. Don't go anywhere. Ulawanaka, and welcome back to the show. Our topic tonight is the Pacific Island Development Forum Leaders Summit, which gets underway in Suva from tomorrow. Our guests are the Interim Secretary General of the PIDF, Mr. Amena Yavuli, and the PIDF Climate Change Advisor, Dr. Mahendra. Dr. Mahendra, the theme, climate change, building climate resilient, green-blue Pacific economies. What exactly are we trying to encompass in the theme itself?
Well, climate change, as you know, is a extremely important development issue for the Pacific Island countries. I think the choice of the climate change theme for the Pacific Island Development Forum this year is particularly timely, considering that this year, as we are all aware, there is going to be a major meeting in Paris which will adopt a new agreement or a protocol which is going to define the sort of actions the international community will take to deal with the climate change issue. So this particular forum provides a useful opportunity for our leaders, for our communities, for the different stakeholders to put their heads together and basically discuss what sort of issues, what are some of the issues our leaders should take to Paris, and what do you want to get out of this agreement. So I think it's with that in mind that the entire forum this year is devoted, quite rightly, I think, to the climate change issue, and in particular the specific issues relating to the new agreement.
This brings me to my next point, Amena, about the membership of the PIDF, the delegates who are coming in, and the experiences that we bring to the PIDF and in turn to COP21. What are some of the reflections that we can expect from some of our members, some of the members of PIDF?
First of all, Edwin, I think it's a great moment, a great opportunity that some of our key outspoken Pacific leaders would be attending the summit. Of course, starting off with our Honorable Prime Minister of Fiji, as well as the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Honorable Sopoanga, and the President of Kiribati, President Atong, Foreign Minister Tony de Bruin of the Marshall Islands, and the Prime Minister of Tonga is also attending, and other leaders. That these are the key leaders who have been very strong in terms of climate advocacy for the Pacific. And the opportunity provided by this year's summit is a great one, because it will enable these discussions, and it will allow them, to discuss issues of importance that they would be able, to coin or frame into a climate declaration that they would take to Paris. So the expectations from the memberships is a very strong climate declaration, which we will call the Suva Declaration.
The Suva Declaration, which we will come to later on in our program. But as you pointed out, some of these leaders are key advocates, but also these islands, looking at Kiribati and Tuvalu, are known around the world as some of the worst affected by climate change itself. They are living through climate change. They're losing their homes, their land, their drinking water, and the very future of their people in some respects. Let's take that into perspective and then bring in other international bodies. You have the Small Island Developing States under the UN, and a number of such organizations which get together and try to lobby. But would it be accurate to say that the PIDF stands alone in the Pacific to try and gel all these countries together? Because let's face it, over a number of years, our voices have been falling on deaf ears.
Thank you, Edwin. Let me just take you a step back. To understand the role of PIDF, we have to understand that this is a space created by Pacific leaders only to enable them to discuss issues of common challenges, such as climate change. They would like, to discuss this in a forum that they can confidently prioritize and say, this is our #1 priority. Let's push this together. Only Pacific countries. And in terms of the link to the small island developing states, that's a UN grouping recognizing all small island developing states. And the negotiating arm of small island developing states is called the Alliance of Small Island States, which is called AOSIS, sometimes commonly abbreviated as AOSIS. They are the negotiating arm at the global level. And to go back to your question, yes, the Pacific needs that voice. We need a well-concerted, organized voice of Pacific seeds, Pacific small island developing states, so that issues dealt with or common challenges or priorities dealt with at the regional level needs to be carried forward to the global level. For instance, climate change. This is key and it is crucial. So the space that is created is really an innovative and a very strong one.
And it's also quite significant that we've got the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Change, Ambassador Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland as well. We get to talk directly to the UN, as well as to the Commonwealth, with the attendance of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Mr. Kamlesh Sharma. We've never had this opportunity before, have we? Not as if we're sitting across the table, just like this.
Yeah, I mean, we are very fortunate that Her Excellency Mary Robinson would avail herself, to this year's summit, because she herself saw, the theme, which is common, and also as an excellent preparatory process that would enable Pacific seeds to formulate their positions before Paris. Positions that is not watered down, positions that is strong, positions that would enable them to achieve mileage in terms of the negotiation process in in Paris. The Commonwealth Secretariat, as you know, the Secretary General is here. He arrived a few days ago, and we're really thankful to him, because that provides another impetus in terms of leveraging, the issues of Pacific seeds to the global level. And there are other leaders coming, and other partners who would be represented also at the summit.
Just very quickly, Dr. Mahendra, in an advisory capacity, when it comes to technical contributions for these member states coming into this PIDF summit, what are some of the advisories that have been issued to them?
Well, thank you. I think the difference in the way we have scheduled the program is to ensure that the advice, the political advice at the international negotiations is underpinned with strong technical and scientific basis. So later on, when we look at the program, you'll find that the way the program has been structured, we have addresses on the general issues which we will be covered at the Paris meeting, and the different tracks, the different sort of groups and sessions will allow the different sectors, the different partners. The thing about PIDF, as Mr. Avoli has said, is it really brings a whole range of stakeholders, the private sector, the NGOs, as well as the leaders. So it provides the opportunity for these different groups, diverse groups, to talk to each other, to discuss the issues, which the climate issues relating to, for example, the energy sector, the agriculture sector, the marine sector, and so on. So you'll find that all of these issues will come out and will provide some robust and information and data, which is something which I think has been lacking in terms of the preparatory process for our negotiators and our leaders in Paris. So I think we hope this will provide a very strong platform for our leaders.
Okay, and with that, we've come to the end of another segment. We will take a quick break. We'll be right back. Pulimanaka, and welcome back. We are talking tonight with the Interim Secretary General of the Pacific Island Development Forum, Amina Yavoli, and the PIDF Climate Change Advisor, Dr. Mahendra. Just going back to the delegates who are coming in, Amina, the chief guest this year is the Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand, General Thanasak. Obviously, there must have been some thought that went into deciding who the keynote speaker would be and what sort of contribution they would make. What are we hoping for from our chief guest this time around?
The importance of inviting a chief guest is always seen in the light of the visions and the missions of PIDF. As you may have seen, that one of the founding pillars of PIDF is leadership, strong leadership. In order for sustainable development to progress, we need strong leadership. Leadership who can demonstrate that anything is achievable, particularly in shifting out of the box, the normal paradigm box of development. So the choice was done through consultations with the chair of the governing council, the Honorable Prime Minister of Fiji, and the Secretariat, as we explore possibilities of nominating someone with a high caliber to become, to bring in this leadership qualities and experience into the discussion. What are we expecting from him? I think it's important to note that PIDF is also strong in terms of moving forward with partnership developments outside of its non-traditional donors, traditional partners. In other words, the organization will provide that brokerage role to enable the Pacific diversify into other partnership platforms or partnership entities or countries that will strengthen, the implementation of that. And Asia has been regarded as the fastest growing region in the world, and looking upon Asia has has been a strength in terms of nominating the chief guest for this year.
Apart from the delegates, the members, and the invite to the chief guest, I understand there has been a lot of interest from very far corners of the world for countries to come in as observers. Obviously, interest is peaking in the PIDF for a number of reasons, but who are these countries who are showing interest, and what are their reasons for wanting to come and attend?
Right now, we are expecting more than 30 countries to participate in this year's summit. As I said earlier, it's a build-up from the first summit. Relationship has been nurtured and developed with the organization. Most of these countries that are coming back, they've seen the value of having this organization here in the Pacific because of its recognition of the multi-sectoral governance, recognition of the important roles of other stakeholders in the development process of each individual Pacific countries. So the value and their attendance is very important for us because it continues to broaden the partnership platform of PIDF. What they bring in their experience. Some of them bringing in financial support, and others the technical assistance that would benefit the organization and her membership in the years to come.
Would you be able to mention some of the interesting names that we can expect at the summit? Obviously, more than 300 delegates are coming in and more than 30 members, but some that would pique the interest of our viewers tonight.
Yes. We have the Foreign Minister of Indonesia. As you know, last year, President SBY, the former President of Indonesia, was our chief guest. And this year, we again graced with her presence, as well as the Minister for Fisheries of Indonesia. As you know, Fiji and Indonesia, as well as the Pacific and Indonesia, they share lots of common values, common goods in terms of experience, expertise, technologies. There are lots of opportunities that the PIDF can explore into. And for the first time, we will be receiving a senior representative from the governments of the Republic of the Philippines, as well as the special envoy of China, who had attended the first two summits, is coming again this year as one of the speakers as well in one of the sessions under the discussions on climate change on Thursday.
All right, and with that, we've come to the end of another segment. Time is actually running away from us tonight. We will take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We will continue discussions with the Interim Secretary General of the PIDF, Mr. Aminaya Vuli, and the PIDF Climate Change Advisor, Dr. Mahendra. Doc, climate change obviously is the single biggest issue for our part of the world. The Suva Declaration, what is it and how did it come about?
Okay, in line with the theme of the forum this year, I think obviously it was felt that one of the major outcomes of this particular forum would be a strong climate declaration. As you know, the momentum towards Paris is building, and there are all sorts of declarations from all sorts of groups all over the world. And as Mr. Evoli has said, given the vulnerability of the Pacific as part of part of SIDS, Small Island Developing States, and given our unique situation, I think this forum provides, or this declaration provides, a very unique opportunity to bring out some of the important issues which are dear to us, which if we did not bring out, then no one else would. So I think the declaration would come out with calls for strong actions in particular areas.
When we say strong action, there have been instances where the Prime Minister of Fiji has even gone as far as the UN, and basically said, if I can quote him, if the guilty countries aren't going to step up, we will shame them into taking action. is that a similar stand that this declaration is going to take? What are some of the recommendations, if you could mention?
Well, I think we have an opportunity to use much stronger language. The small island states, as you know, one of the primary objectives of the convention is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mitigation is used to describe that process. The small island developing states here, we are very small emitters, insignificant. But we are on the front line as far as the impacts are concerned, as you know. But in spite of that, the small island countries have really left no stone unturned in terms of committing to mitigation actions. There is a strong shift, strong emphasis by the international community and a recognition that all the countries, particularly the large emitters, need to take very active and bold steps to reduce their levels of emissions. Because if they did not, then the world is on a trajectory to 4 degrees centigrade and greater warming, which will obviously reap havoc in many parts of the world, and obviously would be particularly dangerous for our small island atoll countries. So one of the things we'd like to include in our declaration is the call for other countries to enhance their levels of ambitions. The countries in the Pacific are actually setting very ambitious targets for mitigation. In fact, if one looks at some of the so-called intended nationally determined contributions, INDCs, which is really one of the building blocks or elements of the new agreement, which will be reached in Paris, countries like Marshall Islands have said that they want to become a zero carbon development by 2050. And I think they have set a target of 45% emissions or decrease in emissions by 2030. So they're very ambitious targets, and then we can go through the entire countries who have advocated that. That's one of the important elements of this particular declaration. The other is, if you look at this Paris Agreement is a successor to Kyoto. The Kyoto Protocol was essentially a mitigation document. There wasn't much emphasis on issues like adaptation. Adaptation is obviously dealing with the impacts of climate change. And we know that the climate change is here, we are feeling it, the countries are feeling it. So we want the new agreement to have equal emphasis, a balanced look at other issues, including adaptation. When you talk about adaptation, there's also a related issue called loss and damage. Now, this loss and damage is not just adaptation, but it is losses incurred due to the slow onset of climate change. For example, you cannot really adapt to loss of lives. So what the declaration would call for is to have loss and damage anchored firmly into the new agreement. One other issue, which is the means of implementation. Often these protocols and declarations talk about doing things, but how? As you know, small island countries and many developing countries are constrained by lack of resources, lack of technology, lack of capacity to be able to deal with this. In spite of their intentions, they need finance, they need capacity, and they need the technology, which is in the hands of either the private sector or the richer industrialized countries. So what we'll be calling upon the richer, the well-to-do countries who have the means to do it is to provide the necessary finance to catalyze technology and help our countries build capacity so that we can deal with these impacts of climate change.
Grow a conscience.
Yes, exactly. So I think we'll also lead by example. I think Mr. Evoli talked about leadership. Here the countries will show, in spite of their small emissions, in spite of the small economies, in spite of being at the front line of climate change and so far as the impacts, they are leading the way in terms of their ambitious targets. So it is, in a sense, telling the world, and in fact, when Marshall Islands earlier, 2 months ago, was the first small island developing state to submit their intended nationally determined contributions to UNFCCC. And you know, they really, there was so much good press internationally to say, hey, if Marshalls can do it, you know, it has hardly any emissions worth talking about. I mean, why wouldn't the bigger emitters, the bigger polluters, you know, take some responsibility?
Once this charter, the Suva declaration is adopted, obviously we have to then wait for COP21 in Paris. But what happens in the meantime between the Suva declaration and taking it to Paris?
What would be important, Edwin, is having the leaders' agreement and also a mandate that allows PIDF, the organization, to carry this forward to Paris. Obviously, there will be other processes happening between next week and Paris. So this declaration will be used by all our negotiators. In fact, next week the negotiation resumes again in Bonn on this new agreement. And also our Pacific Small Island Developing States ambassadors in New York, who has been very helpful to us in providing the first draft of this agreement. So you can see that there is a connection in here in terms of the UN process, where our Pacific ambassadors in New York would be able, to use this in whatever fora or forum that they will be attending, and it will be taken all the way to Paris.
Okay, and it's time to take yet another break tonight. Don't go anywhere. Evening. Welcome back once again to For the Record. As you would be aware, our discussions tonight are on the Pacific Island Development Forum Leaders Summit, which gets underway in the capital, Suva, this week. The theme is on climate change. It's called Building Climate Resilient Green-Blue Pacific Economies, and we've been having discussions tonight on a number of issues related to climate change and our part of the world, small island developing states, and some of the Pacific's countries which are facing the worst consequences of climate change. The Suva Declaration, as we've been talking about, Doc, there will be a number of papers presented in Paris, a number of findings, technical reports, declarations, and whatnot, commitments as well from some of the countries who are seen to be the highest emitters. But what sets the Suva Declaration apart from everything else in Paris?
Yes, I think the process of actually developing and coming to this declaration has been a very inclusive process, and true to the spirit of the PIDF. The program is really designed around a lot of sessions where every sector, different stakeholders will have opportunity to discuss issues which are dear to them. So if you look at, for example, the Thursdays program, we have presentations on what are some of the issues which will be raised in Paris. And later on, the meeting will break into 3 parallel sessions, which will be divided into a leaders parallel session, a NGO session, and one with private sector. And this will be moderated, and each of these groups will then be able to discuss issues which are particularly important. As you know, in the climate deals and the climate financing, the role of the private-public partnerships also emphasize the role of the civil society is extremely important. So they will have an opportunity to sort of bring the issues which they think are important, which our leaders should know. Later on Thursday afternoon, we will break out into 6 tracks which are on thematic lines. So we have a track on energy and transportation sector, agriculture and forestry, and a whole range of civil society, health, sanitation, a number of issues which are important. And again, in those smaller groups, the specific issues relating to the particular sector and the nexus with climate change is going to be drawn out. And all of these will then feed into the thinking and the issues which will be part of the declaration.
So we're getting to the core of it.
We're really getting to the core of it. So it's not just broad statements and so on. These are broad statements backed with some real data, with some information relating to the countries and their particular situation.
Okay, and just wrapping up for tonight, Amina, at the end of it all said and done, obviously climate change is something that we will have to continue to work on in the years and decades to come, but the PIDF itself is an entity into perpetuity. Looking into the future, in the immediate future, what are some of the outcomes you would like to see for the PIDF itself?
Number 1 is the climate declaration. As you know, my hand has already defined that very well. And the second is post-Paris. What comes out of Paris? There should be a continuity in terms of engagements, implementations within the visions and the missions of a PIDF. The second issue is for PIDF is the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Leaders will adopt that in September, which means that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals replacing the Millennium Development Goals, these are important, and climate is one of the goals in there. So the work will continue to evolve, but the exciting thing for the organization, for PIDF, it has set itself in a very strong platform, regional platform, that will deliver for Pacific Island countries, Pacific organizations, including the NGOs and private sectors and civil societies.
All right, with that, I have to thank you gentlemen very much for being on the show. That's the end for us tonight. That was our show for the evening. Remember, if you have comments or questions, email fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. Up next is Fiji Sun's veteran journalist Nemani Delaim-Batiki with his weekly column, My Say. From me for tonight, good evening.
Good evening. I'm Nemani Delaim-Batiki of the Fiji Sun. Welcome to Fiji's only TV editorial show. In my say this week, I will speak on violence, hatred, and nation building. My spine cringes when I hear people who profess to be Christians use the Lord's name in vain. On one hand, they speak of Jesus Christ, but on the other, they talk of hatred and violence. Vulgar language and Jesus Christ just do not mix. It's like trying to mix oil with water. The use of religious beliefs to achieve extremist political ideologies is a recipe for disaster. Those who know their scriptures will not put a spin on the holy words to satisfy their selfish and narrow sectional interests. But those who don't do not care about the welfare of the people who get hurt and are scarred for life because of their irresponsible actions. Jesus Christ preached love and peace when he lived on this earth. He taught people to forgive one another. Never during his ministry in the land of Palestine did he preach violence and hatred to justify a course or action. He healed the sick and made lame people walk. He restored the eyesight of the blind and hearing for the deaf. He visited the poor, the needy, and the rejects of society, those who were referred to then as untouchables. He never discriminated people. In fact, he united people. He tore down the barriers that separated them and instructed them to love one another. His own people misunderstood him and falsely accused him. He was convicted and crucified to atone for the sins of all mankind. His final act? He forgave those who conspired to inflict terrible pain and unimaginable suffering on him as he hung on the cross. Real and genuine Christians will do their best to emulate his example. It's a travesty of his standards when people use his name and do things contrary to his teachings. I'm talking about those in our midst who use his name to fight their political battles using methods that are totally opposed to his moral code. The best way to see if we are going in the right direction is to measure our standards to his. If they do not match, then we need to change. Otherwise, we're heading to disaster, grief, and pain. Last week I talked about Matthew Nabakasuasua, a former soldier of the Republic of Fiji military forces. He now lives in Australia. He was one of the gunmen who stormed Parliament in Veuto on May the 19th, 2000 to overthrow Mahendra Chaudhry's Labour government. He served his prison term for his crime. In hindsight, he said he regretted what he did, saying he was influenced by failed politicians, corrupt businessmen, church and community leaders, who told him the coup was to protect the interest of the Itoke. Nabakasuasua believes the same kind of elements are now preying on innocent and vulnerable people to engage in violence and destabilize the government. Most of the ones he knows have moved overseas and have continued their battle in the social media. He says their targets are vulnerable people who are easily influenced. We've got to look back and learn from what had happened in 2000 and even in 1987. To build this nation, we must have peace and stability, and that will happen if we uphold the law and our democratic ideals. We cannot abuse our democratic rights to break the law. We need to learn from history, otherwise we are heading to another crisis. I am Neman Indelembetiki, and that was my say this week. For more of my views, you can read the Fiji Sun. See you next week.